Welcome to Clinical Capsules from TRC Healthcare, your trusted source for practical, evidence based updates. On this episode, Associate Editor and Clinical Pharmacist Vickie Danaher shares practical guidance on how Orforglipron, the second oral GLP-1 agonist for weight loss, stacks up against oral semaglutide in terms of dosing, efficacy, safety, cost, and more, in an excerpt from our popular Pharmacy Essential Updates webinar series. This podcast offers continuing education credit for pharmacists and pharmacy technicians. Please log into your pharmacist letter or pharmacy technician's letter account and look for the title of this podcast in the list of available CE courses. None of the speakers have anything to disclose. Catch new episodes of Clinical Capsules every second and fourth Tuesday, bringing concise, actionable insights from TRC experts straight to your ears. Let's take a closer look.
So let's get started by looking at a really hot topic about new prescription Orforglipron or Foundayo for weight loss. And our article says you'll get questions about Orforglipron or Foundayo, the second oral GLP-1 receptor agonist approved for adults with overweight or obesity. And we know that this follows the approval of the first oral GLP-1 agonist for this indication, oral semaglutide or Wegovy pill. So now having oral eflornithine also available means that we'll need to know how it stacks up to oral semaglutide in terms of things like efficacy, safety, and dosing to help individualize which med might be a better fit for a particular patient. So to get us thinking about this, let's explore a patient scenario that many of us are likely to encounter in practice. Our patient today is Angela. She's 46 years old, and she stops by the pharmacy with questions about weight loss medications. Angela has obesity with a BMI of 34, and she also has hypertension or high blood pressure, for which she takes lisinopril 10 milligrams daily. For obesity, Angela says that she's tried lifestyle changes, but that hasn't been enough to help her keep the weight off. She also mentions that she's not quite ready for weight loss injections, but she knows that there's two newer oral GLP medications available in pills. So she asks you which one of these oral meds is better, either oral semaglutide or the new oral orforglipron. So what would you say back to Angela? Are there any things you'd want to ask her or know about her to help answer her question? Let's start to dig into the specifics with orforglipron and how it compares to oral semaglutide. And in many ways, we can think of orforglipron as similar to oral semaglutide. Both are oral, once daily GLP-1 agonists that work to slow gastric emptying, so food leaves the stomach more slowly. And they both will reduce appetite by acting on receptors in the brain involved in hunger and satiety. But a big difference is that orforglipron is a non-peptide small molecule drug. And this molecular structure allows it to stay more stable and better absorbed throughout the gut. Stomach acid doesn't break it down, so it can be taken at any time of day with or without food. On the other hand, oral semaglutide is a peptide that can be broken down by stomach acid. So, to keep it from being destroyed in the stomach, patients have to follow pretty strict dosing requirements. They'll need to take oral semaglutide with no more than 4 ounces of water at least 30 minutes before the first food, beverage, or oral medications of the day. Now, before we get into orforglipron's efficacy and dosing, I want to address a point of confusion that came up for our editors as we were really researching and digging into this topic. So, if you read the studies, you may notice that the approved dosages and dosage forms of orforglipron are different than what was used in the clinical trials. The clinical trials studied an investigational capsule formulation of orforglipron with doses ranging from 1 milligram up to 36 milligrams. However, the approved and marketed products, so what we're actually going to see in our pharmacies, is an orforglipron tablet with strengths ranging from zero point 0.8 milligrams to 17.2 milligrams. Now, the manufacturer says that each tablet strength available corresponds to an equivalent capsule strength that was studied. For example, the zero point 0.8 milligram tablet that's available corresponds to the 1 milligram capsule that was studied, and the 17.2 milligram tablet that's available corresponds to the 36 milligram capsule that was studied in the trials. And unpublished manufacturer data show that at each equivalent dose pair, the tablets and the capsules provides comparable systemic exposure. So meaning that they deliver essentially the same blood levels of the drug. So this was a deliberate strategy manufacturer to move from the capsule used in trials to a tablet that could be more easily manufactured at scale without changing the pharmacokinetic profile. So, if you're reading the clinical trial data or seeing this in parts of the package insert, and you notice that the capsule doses don't seem to manage the tablet versions on the shelf, that's why. Okay, so now that we've cleared up the formulation issue, let's talk about how well orforglipron actually works for obesity. So, in terms of efficacy, be aware that oral orforglipron 17.2 milligram tablet daily for 72 weeks leads to about 9% more weight loss than with placebo. So, this comes out to about 21 pounds or so for a 227-pound patient. And we can explain that this efficacy seems in the same ballpark as oral semaglutide 25 milligram daily, which leads to about 11% more weight loss than with placebo. So, generally speaking, efficacy seems pretty similar if we think about 9% more weight loss than placebo versus 11% more weight loss than with placebo, with oral semaglutide potentially having a very slight edge. But keep in mind that there aren't any published head to head trials for these two medications in obesity. So, any comparisons that we see are based on cross trial data. And we know that we need to interpret these cautiously, giving differences in study population, designs, and study duration. When considering GLP-1 meds for weight loss, we'll also want to tailor the selection based on things like cost and access, the patient's other comorbidities, and other medication benefits. For example, oral semaglutide for obesity is also approved to reduce the risk of cardiovascular events, such as stroke or heart attacks, in patients with CV disease and obesity. And then we know that other GLP-1 agonist medications like semaglutide or tirzepatide come in different products approved for type 2 diabetes based on their blood glucose lowering benefits. But be aware that orforglipron is not yet approved for type 2 diabetes. However, one 17.2 milligram tablet daily lowers A1C about 1% more than placebo and about 0.4% more than oral semaglutide 14 milligrams daily. And the manufacturer does plan to submit this drug for a diabetes indication later on this year. So I anticipate hearing more about orforglipron for this use, as well as other things it's being studied for, including cardiovascular risk reduction and osteoarthritis. When it comes to dosing, like the other GLP-1 agonists, orforglipron is started low and titrated monthly to improve tolerability. And to help facilitate this, the med is available in 6 different strengths. So we'll want to watch oral orforglipron dosing closely and help ensure appropriate titration. Most patients getting orforglipron for weight loss will start with one zero point 0.8 milligram tablet for 30 days and then increase every month to 2.5 milligrams and then to 5.5 milligrams once daily, which is the lowest designated therapeutic dose. From there, the dose may be increased to the next dosage levels, so 9 milligrams, 14.5 milligrams, or 17.2 milligrams once daily after at least 30 days on each strength. And this would be based on patient's treatment response and tolerability. So, this is a key area for us in the pharmacy, and especially for pharmacy technicians to be checking strengths closely during order entry and pulling meds from the pharmacy shelves. Verify that the patient is picking up the correct dosage based on the titration schedule, and also ensuring that the lower doses get stopped as patients step up dosing to avoid duplication. Now let's talk about side effects and key safety considerations with orforglipron. And we can explain to our patients like Angela in our case that overall the side effects of orforglipron are pretty similar to what we see with the other GLP-1 receptor agonists. The most common issues are stomach related things like nausea, diarrhea, abdominal discomfort, and sometimes vomiting, especially during dose titration. But studies suggest that there may be a somewhat higher discontinuation rate with orforglipron compared with oral semaglutide, potentially due to these GI side effects. So that's something to keep in mind, and another reason to make sure that patients start low and go slow with the dose titration to improve tolerability. In terms of serious safety concerns, orforglipron carries the same precautions and warnings as other GLP-1 agonists, so rare risks of thyroid tumors, pancreatitis, and gallbladder disease, for example. Also, take note that orforglipron has no human data in pregnancy or lactation, and based on animal studies, fetal risk is possible. So, females of childbearing age should use effective contraception during treatment with orforglipron. Also, point out that the effect of orforglipron on the absorption of oral contraceptives hasn't been studied. And we know that from some other GLP-1 agonists that possible reduced absorption and efficacy of oral contraceptives could occur due to the GLP-1's effect on delaying gastric emptying. So, orforglipron labeling recommends a non-oral method of contraception, such as the ring, patch, or an intrauterine device, or using a barrier method like condoms, for 30 days after starting orforglipron and 30 days after each dose increase. In terms of other interactions, there's also a few other bigger ones to stay alert for with orforglipron as well. For example, orforglipron shouldn't be used with strong CYP3A4 inducers, such as carbamazepine, since this may reduce orforglipron drug levels and effectiveness. On the other hand, CYP3A4 inhibitors increase orforglipron exposure, which may increase the risk of adverse reactions. So for these, the maximum dosage of orforglipron is 9 milligrams once daily when used with a strong CYP3A4 inhibitor like clarithromycin. Patients on civastatin should also not take more than 20 milligrams once daily of this cholesterol medication if also taking orforglipron. Use with simvastatin increased exposure of the active metabolite of simvastatin acid twofold, whether orforglipron was co-administered or dosing was staggered by 2 hours. So this has the potential to increase statin adverse effects. However, no clinically relevant changes were observed for orforglipron when used with rosuvastatin or atorvastatin. And then, of course, the big question and what GLP-1 agonist a patient will get often boils down to cost. And like we often see prior auths with the other GLP-1 agonists for obesity, we should expect prior auths for orforglipron too. Orforglipron costs about $650 per month, which is about half the cost of oral semaglutide tablets. But patients may be able to get these prescriptions for less with manufacturer savings or direct to consumer programs. So, really, the choice of product will also need to factor in the patient's particular coverage benefits and how much they're willing to spend for these medications. Keeping all this in mind, let's now circle back to our patient Angela and think about how we'd actually approach the conversation with her in practice. To help decide whether oral semaglutide or orforglipron might be a better fit, there's a few key things we'd want to ask, 'cause there's no one size fits all here. One big question that I saw many of you chatted in is about her routine and adherence. So, can Angela reliably take a medication first thing in the morning on an empty stomach with strict timing? Or would something with more flexible dosing better fit her day and her schedule? We'd also want to ask about other medications that she's taking. For example, we know that she gets lisinopril from our pharmacy, but is she on any drugs that could interact, like strong CYP3A inhibitors or inducers or oral contraceptives? Those details could sway the decision here as well. And then definitely cost and access matter too. So, does she have insurance coverage for either option? Do they require prior authorization? Or is she going to purchase the medication out of pocket and is she aware of the costs? And then finally, what are her expectations of therapy? We want to make sure that this aligns with what these medications can deliver and what she's willing and able to stick with long term. So, when you put all that together, the goal isn't to say that one medication is universally better, but to help match the option to each patient's preferences, routine, risk factors, and values. For example, Orforglipron may be better for patients who want or need simpler or more flexible dosing, or those who struggle with fasting requirements or morning routines, since it can be taken at any time of day with or without food. Whereas, again, oral semaglutide must be taken on an empty stomach with a very small amount of water, and then patients must wait 30 minutes before the first food, beverage, or other meds of the day. On the other hand, oral semaglutide may be a better fit for those patients who can reliably follow the strict dosing instructions and who want to squeeze out the maximum amount of weight loss possible, since semaglutide might have slightly better efficacy. Although, again, the efficacy with orforglipron is in the same general ballpark. For now, we'd also want to suggest oral semaglutide in patients who have cardiovascular disease, since semaglutide has the benefit of reducing the risk of MACE or major adverse cardiovascular events like CV death, heart attack, or stroke. But orforglipron doesn't yet have this indication. And oral semaglutide would also be the option to lean towards if a patient takes strong CYP3A4 interacting drugs, since it has fewer interactions compared to orforglipron. Let's wrap things up here with a few more practice pearls that we can bring back to our pharmacies. And a big one that we'll need to continue doing is paying close attention to products and strengths. Since, like I mentioned earlier, orforglipron comes in 6 different strengths. Also, make sure to keep and dispense orforglipron tablets in its original container at room temperature and tell patients to store them the same way at home, since the tablets are sensitive to light. If a dose of orforglipron is missed, instruct patients to take the dose as soon as possible and not to double up on the next dose. Continue to emphasize and encourage increased physical activity, having a well balanced, nutritious diet with protein and staying hydrated. And last but not least, taking steps to help promote adherence and set patients up for success. We know that patients will often need to stay on the medication long term to maintain weight loss. As more and more GLP-1 options continue to enter the picture, remember that you can turn to our interactive GLP-1 receptor agonist comparison chart available on our pharmacist letter and pharmacy technicians letter website. It lets you quickly line up products by things like indications, dosing, titration schedules, and clinical outcomes. So it's especially useful when you're comparing options, thinking through a potential switch, or just double checking whether something makes sense. And stepping back a bit further, if you're thinking beyond just GLP 1s, we also have a broader comparison of weight loss products chart that looks at how all the approved options for obesity and overweight stack up.
Thanks for listening. We hope today's episode gave you practical insights you can use right away. Now that you've listened, pharmacists and pharmacy technicians can receive CE credit. Just log into your pharmacist letter or pharmacy technician's letter account and look for the title of this podcast in the list of available CE courses. We've linked the resources we mentioned and more on today's topic right in the show notes. Those links will take you straight to our websites where you'll find even more concise, evidence-based charts, articles, and tools. If you're not yet a subscriber, now's the time. Sign up today to stay ahead with trusted, unbiased insights and continuing education. Listeners save 10% on a new or upgraded subscription. Just use code CC1026 at checkout. If you found this episode helpful, follow Clinical Capsules or leave a quick rating or review. It helps others discover the show. Even better, share what you learned with a friend or a colleague and let them know they can find the show on any podcast app or on YouTube. Thanks for listening. Stay sharp, stay current, and join us next time on Clinical Capsules.